This is our third session together, and so far we've explored ways to redefine our relationship with money, and we've talked about making God the goal and our greatest ambition. These are some big topics. Hopefully you've been able to have some important conversations about what this means for you with your spouse, pastor, advisor, or trusted friend, because many of us want our investing and giving to make an impact. But as often the case, we're either unaware of what's happening, or worse, we've set our finances on cruise control with hopes that our money makes it to retirement with us. As we've said before, the last thing we want to be is prescriptive or presumptuous. But there's a growing movement of Christ followers who are waking up to the power and influence our finances have. I know for Luke and I, faith-driven investing absolutely transformed the way we look at giving and investing. In fact, we've changed where and how we allocate with a renewed focus on God as our goal. God owns it all, and he wants us to steward it well, knowing that every decision we make has an impact. All investing is impact investing. John Coleman, managing partner at Sovereign's Capital, unpacks this concept for us. Let's watch.
In a commencement speech to Kenyon College, the writer David Foster Wallace offered a wonderful little vignette. Two little fish are swimming through the ocean when they pass an older fish who tips his hat to him and says, "Good morning, gents. How's the water?" The two little fish continue to swim past when one fish looks at the other and says, "What's water?" The moral of the story, of course, is that sometimes the hardest things to see are those that surround us every day. And that's true, I think, of financial assets in the broader world. If you look at the world of financial investments today, there are more than $120 trillion in managed assets around the world. And those assets touch almost every facet of our life. They finance the big companies that we're all familiar with, companies like Coca-Cola or Home Depot or UPS in my hometown of Atlanta, down to smaller companies that use debt or equity financing for the local yogurt shop or deli on your street, for the iPhone in your pocket, for the clothes that you wear, even for the mortgages that you take out on your home. This world of managed assets is all around us every day, shaping the culture in which we live, and yet we rarely think about it. However, much of the mainstream world, particularly the investing world, has woken up to the idea that this financial capital all around the world shapes our culture in meaningful ways and has spurred a renaissance in what we think of as values-based investing, or what much of the mainstream world calls environmental, social, and governance investing, ESG. This is where companies or institutions or investment management firms really think about the values that they hold dear and try and action those in the investments that they make. Within the ESG framework, environmental concerns often involve things like combating global climate change, putting in place environmentally friendly standards in real estate development opportunities, thinking about the carbon emissions of the companies with which they work. The social framework also thinks about the social impact of that capital on communities, whether that be the diversity of the employee base or whether there are human rights abuses or human trafficking in supply chain. And the governance part of that, the G in ESG, thinks about how those companies are led, whether that's just the separation of the CEO and chairman roles within a boardroom or the diversity of the board itself. There are more than $40 trillion in those assets around the world right now, and most mainstream investment managers and mainstream institutions are using those principles to shape the world in meaningful ways. This looks like a variety of different strategies. On the far end, there's negative screening, something with which we're almost all familiar, which is where you exclude holdings that you feel are misaligned with your values from your portfolio. And yet it's expanded far beyond that to include a variety of positive tools. There's positive screening, where you look for characteristics in a company that you actually care about, that you want to promote. There's thematic investing, which you overinvest in industries or segments that you want to see grow, like renewable energy. There's activist investing, where public companies will find activist shareholders who come in and try and rejuvenate their cultures. And there's broad-based ESG stewardship, where almost every major investment manager in the world seeks to align their voting preferences in public companies with the types of values that ESG promotes. All told, this comprises a comprehensive framework by which major institutions and investors seek to engage with the world. and that engagement is in a very concentrated set of hands. If you look at the top 10 asset managers around the world, those 10 asset managers now control more than 30% of the S&P 500 and a similar percentage of investments broadly in the world. There are 10 asset management companies who control almost a third of the investments in the world. The top 3 of those asset managers, State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, control almost 20% of the S&P 500 and comprise collectively the largest shareholder in 88% of the S&P 500. And almost all of those firms have some concentrated group thinking about the values they're expressing in their investments. At BlackRock, for example, there's a team of more than 50 ESG specialists who think about aligning their investment dollars across trillions of dollars of different investments with the values that they and their clients hold dear. And it's not just the largest asset managers who are doing it. If you look in the smaller asset management world, there are a variety of niche investors who are seeking to change the world through the values of their investments. One of the greatest examples from last year was a small firm less than $500 million called Engine Number One that with a 0.02% stake in ExxonMobil managed to effectively take over the board agenda of one of the largest public companies in the world. By rallying larger investors like public pension plans and some of the asset managers that we mentioned, Engine Number One with this tiny less than 1% stake was able to gain 3 board seats at Exxon on an agenda trying to seek to more closely embed climate change principles in the governance of that company. And there are countless examples where smaller asset managers have made a big difference on the companies in which they operate. Unfortunately, even as this idea has grown in the mainstream, it's lagged amongst Christians. Christianity and Judaism and Islam have this remarkable history of impact or values-based investing over the last 5,000 years. In the ancient Jewish scriptures, there were tons of admonitions about how to align your financial activity with the principles of your faith. Similarly, in Islam, Sharia finance has risen up throughout the course of the history of that religion to dominate the way in which Muslims think about stewarding their financial assets. Christianity talks about in the New Testament scriptures the way in which we should seek to steward assets. And a few hundred years ago, the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, laid out some of the first negative screening principles, excluding things like alcohol, tobacco, and firearms from investment portfolios, a series of criteria that stayed largely consistent for Christians to this day. It was even the Episcopal Church in 1971 who really ignited the modern activist or ESG movement when holding less than 1% of General Motors stock. They launched a campaign to change that company's activities in apartheid South Africa that really catalyzed a movement on apartheid generally and in corporate engagement generally that gave birth to this modern ESG movement. And yet, if you look over the last 50 years, Christians and faith-driven investing have either stagnated or declined, even as mainstream values investing has risen. Today in the United States, there are more than $50 trillion in public equities, and yet there are only about $28 billion of explicitly faith-driven investment strategies in U.S. public markets, most of which is just negative screening. Comprehensively, there are somewhere between $100 and $250 billion in faith-driven investing globally, despite the fact that Christians must control somewhere on the order of $20 to $40 trillion in financial impact. Effectively, as the rest of the world has woken up to this idea that their values can be expressed in their investments to change culture, Christians have often relegated that responsibility to their mainstream counterparts, rather than developing a distinctively faith-driven approach to those topics. That doesn't have to be the case. There are options for Christians, just like the mainstream ESG world, to express their values as part of their investment strategy. That can look like negative screening, certainly, but it can go beyond negative screening to positively screening the types of characteristics we want to see in companies, those that we think encourage love of neighbor and human flourishing amongst employees, customers, and suppliers. It can move into things like activism and ESG engagement, where we vote proxy shares, where we try and influence the agendas of public corporations and private companies through voting our shares and through issuing letters to those boards, something that many ETF companies are now taking on. It can look like concessionary impact, where we explicitly place mission above financial returns in our priorities and seek to fund initiatives that might otherwise not be funded. And it can look like detailed company and cultural formation, something near and dear to my heart, where through venture capital or private equity or private credit or real estate, we can actually shape from their origination these assets around the world to cultures that align with the principles of our Christian faith. You can seed or invest in early stage companies so that entrepreneurs who are Christians can seek to shape those companies with the principles of their faith. You can invest in private companies and come alongside those owner-operators to try and build cultures that are aligned with Christian faith. We've seen this amongst a number of companies in the United States and around the world, and they create better cultures for employees, but also create cultures that are their competitive advantage and outperform from a financial perspective others in the marketplace. This is a huge opportunity for Christians, not just to think about the impact of their charitable giving, which sometimes comprises only 5 or 10% of what people have, but to think about the other 90 or 95% of their assets that are going to investments. And instead of yielding the influence of those investments to mainstream managers, to wield them for influence aligned with their Christian faith. Fortunately, there are more options than ever in faith-driven investing, comprising ETF and mutual fund companies, fixed income strategies, public equity strategies, private equity and venture strategies, credit, real estate, and almost every asset class you can imagine. And if you dig into it, there are faith-aligned managers out there who can help you steward your capital well. But the key for us is to simply get off the sidelines, to realize that all of the assets that we have impact. All investing is impact investing. And the only question for us is whether we're going to steward that impact well, aligned with the principles of our Christian faith, to create a better world that encourages love of neighbor and human flourishing, or whether we're going to yield that impact to others, delegate our responsibility to others who may or may not align with those values. The question is put to us today, and I would encourage everyone to get off the sidelines and really think about using all of their financial capital, all this water that surrounds us every day, for a positive impact aligned with their faith.
Here's the crazy thing. Most of us might not realize that much of our investable capital is not just sitting idle. It's not neutral. In fact, our invested dollars just might be actively going against our core beliefs. And instead of achieving what we hope to accomplish, it's actually negating any good we want to do in the world. The UN says investing is needed to solve some of the world's greatest problems. Sure, giving needs to increase. But as you see, generosity won't get us there alone. As John shares, all investing is impact investing. The question we need to ask is, are my investments impacting the world for God's glory? Faith-driven investing, as John mentioned, isn't a new thing. A lot of other religions around the world have been aligning their faith and values for decades. We are mobilizing people to activate their capital in the way that the body of believers has done in the past. In the church, we're often known for what we avoid more than being known for something. This is really a holistic picture. What you give, what you invest for impact, and what you invest for a market rate return. Each of these categories offer great ways to get involved. Advisors often will steer clear of risk. Yes, there's a risk associated with this kind of approach, as there is with all investing. But there are advisors out there looking to help you navigate these waters. Visit faithdriveninvestor.org to connect with a like-minded community that can walk alongside you in your investing journey. What's something new you learned today? Do you know what you're investing in? Or are you sleepwalking with the resources God has entrusted to you? Pray about this with your spouse. Invite a friend to pray for and with you. God seems to be most present when you can share your thoughts and dreams with the people you trust most. Write your prayers down in a journal for something to look back on and to see God moving in your life. See you next time.
Faith Driven Investor is a discipleship ministry from Faith Driven Movements, a nonprofit corporation whose mission is to inspire and mobilize people to use their time, talent, and resources to impact the world around them. The materials are for informational purposes only. All investing carries risk, so be sure to consult an advisor before making any investment decisions. Hosts and guests may maintain positions in the companies and securities discussed. For all other questions, please visit faithdriveninvestor.org.